Okay, now we're gonna go through our last activity, activity 4. You can find this activity in the unit where you're watching this video. I'm going to read through some of these statements, and I would like you to determine whether they are fact or myth, and try and be able to talk through and justify your points based on whether they're fact or myth. So the first one, L1 transfer is detrimental to L2 learning. Number 2, interlanguage is based on a learner's confusion between his or her multiple languages. The language acquisition of monolingual and simultaneous bilingual children is similar. The language acquisition of simultaneous bilingual children and sequential bilingual children is similar. Learning a second language interferes with the development of a first language. And people who code switch have a language deficit and do not know either language well. So at this time, you can pause your video, take a moment to try and figure out the answers, and then you can press play and I'll go over it with you. Okay, so now let's go over it. So for the first one, L1 transfer is detrimental to L2 learning. This is a myth. In fact, the first language helps support development in the second language. Because we know that many skills transfer across languages, we want to take advantage of that knowledge that the child brings in the first language to the second language. Number 2 is also a myth. So interlanguage is not confusion. Confusion means that a person has no idea what they're doing, and whatever sort of comes out is not based on anything systematic or rule-governed. Interlanguage is exactly the opposite of that. Interlanguage represents something that showcases the student's knowledge of language and grammatical application. Now, the application may not be correct, but it is a step in that direction because it's definitely systematic. The student is applying some grammatical rules. It's just that they might be applied incorrectly at that point. Number 3. This is a fact. If you remember when we went over our language acquisition between monolingual and simultaneous bilingual children, it was quite similar, very much so in terms of the stages. What tended to be different was the phonology, where the student might take the sounds from both languages and sort of use them in either language. This is before they have made the distinction between language 1 and language 2 and sort of started to separate knowledge and information into both of those. Number 4 is a myth. If you remember the language acquisition process that we went through, for simultaneous bilingual children, it's very different to sequential bilingual children. This is because simultaneous bilingual children are learning two first languages at the same time. And so they're not starting with a knowledge base in any language. So they're not sort of doing the thing where they're trying to apply grammatical rules that they've learned beforehand. In fact, they are learning the grammatical rules of two different languages at the same time. Very different to the sequential bilingual, where that sort of transfer is very common because they are coming to the table with a whole sort of foundation in a previous language. Number 5. Learning a second language interferes with the development of a first language. That is a myth. So learning a second language interferes with the development of a first language. That is a myth. We have the natural capability as human beings to learn multiple languages, and in fact, in many places, I would say most places in the world, people learn multiple languages from the age of birth to even older. They encounter languages and start learning them. So this idea that learning a second language would be somehow detrimental or slow down the process of learning the first language really is not founded at all by research and by the realities of bilinguals. The last one is also a myth. People who code switch have a language deficit and do not know either language well. Actually, it's the opposite. People who code switch are code switching for strategic and specific purposes. They're doing it with other bilinguals who can also code switch and who are going to understand their code switching. And when they code switch, they're showing their very complex and nuanced linguistic awareness because they're able to switch out the correct parts of speech for the right sort of words. They also, while they may code switch to sort of replace a word that they may not know, the fact that they know the word in another language and are using that as a substitute shows you how complex their language understanding is. Okay, so let's go over assignment B. The sort of last portion of the second essay is requiring the information that we've studied today about second language acquisition. I'm going to read over some of the guidelines. These are available in Blackboard under assignment B in the assignment guidelines tab. So in the second essay, you will include an examination and discussion of the language learning errors made by the learner. Select one type of error per group member for each category: syntax, morphology, semantics. For each selected error, include the following. So these are the components that second essay needs to include. The first one is a clear and complete description of the error. The second piece is the US English language rule that was violated, and this should be cited based on a grammar book. I would suggest that you use Martin Parrott, which is the other book that you have bought for this course and the one that you've been doing your assignment C linguistic PowerPoints on. Okay, the third piece is that you have to give the most probable specific linguistic reason for the occurrence of the error. And you also have to give a detailed and specific explanation or justification around why you think this error is due to one of two things. And this is where you have to make the choice. If it's due to transfer from the first language or development in the second language. Okay, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And then the other thing is that when you justify and explain either your case as to whether the error is an L1 transfer or an L2 development error, you have to cite at least two outside sources. I've already done the work for you. I don't want you to go and find your own articles and do your own research. I've done the research for you already. I have all of the documents, readings, and articles listed in Blackboard in that assignment B folder. All you have to do is figure out which theory you're going to use, also if you're going to use L1 transfer or L2 development, and then use the articles that I list there to try and justify your point. And I'm going to go through the documents that you can use to help you through this. So this document is another one that you're going to find in that assignment B folder. And you'll see that it lists how to find appropriate research to support analysis of your error. So you have decided whether the error you've selected is L1 transfer or L2 development. If it's L1 transfer, what you are saying is that the child has made this error because they've taken a rule from their first language and they've applied it to their attempts at English, and it actually doesn't work in English. That rule doesn't apply in English. And so what happens is that's the error. That's where the error comes from. Okay, that would be L1 transfer. If you're saying that the error is an L2 development error, what that means is that the rule that's been applied has nothing to do with the rule in the first language. It's just sort of an application mistake that the child has made in his or her sort of natural, normal process of learning. Okay. So in this document, I would ask you to ignore that bottom line where it says if you've determined your error to be based on normal L2, forget that, scratch that. This table on this page represents all of the theories that would help you to make your point if you chose your error as an L1 transfer error. Okay. So let's read the first one. It's called Selinko's interlanguage theory. In second language acquisition, it is expected that second language learners will produce an interim language between their first and second language, which is referred to interlanguage. This system causes second language learners to produce errors that may be attributed to interferences from the mother tongue, the first language, or difficulties of learning complex English structures. So this should be familiar to you because we just covered interlanguage. That's sort of the description to help you remember or understand Solinko's interlanguage theory. And you'll see at the right-hand side all the references that I've listed, which would be available in Blackboard for you to read through and use to justify your discussion of why your error is an L1 transfer error. And the other theories that are listed on the left-hand side would be other theories that you could use to do the same thing. Okay, so this table is only for those people who have chosen their error and have analyzed it to be based on an L1 transfer. Okay, here you see a second table. This table is going to be helpful for those people whose error they've chosen is representative of just a normal second language development error. Okay, nothing to do with the first language or transfer of grammar at all. It's just sort of a misapplication of the grammar rules that they've been learning in English, they've sort of misapplied them. So the same thing, you would look at the theories on the left-hand side, choose one. Let's just go for the first one. You can read the description. It says, language learners make second language errors because they may not be able to judge all the necessary linguistic information in the second language, since they are still trying to learn the grammatical features and application of the rules. That is a description of McLaughlin's attention processing model. Then if you go all the way to the right-hand side, you'll see that there are references listed for you and that will be available in Blackboard for you to use. And so at this point, if that theory makes sense as an explanation of why your student made the error that they made, you would go into Blackboard, find those references, read through them, and use them as citations in your description and explanation. I'd like to give you an example of how this should be written up so that you have a model to work from. The first one we're going to talk about is the second language development, okay? Not L1 transfer. Right now we're going to talk about if you were to choose second language development as the reason why the child made the error, okay? The second one. The morphology error we're going to talk about is sister, and the fact that sister does not have the possession, right? My sister name is Rosa is supposed to be my sister's name is Rosa. First step, you give a clear and complete description of the error. The child failed to add the bound inflectional suffix '(s) to the noun sister in the phrase, my sister name is Rosa, to show possession. Okay, so that statement sort of checks off that first step, right? Gives a clear and complete description of the error. The second step, if you remember, is to provide the standard US English language rule of the error and sort of the language rule that was violated. So here's an example of how that should be written up. The standard US English language rule that was violated was that in English, possession is shown by adding '(s) to a noun, and to even be more specific, to the end of a noun. And you've seen that I've cited parrot here, because that rule can actually be found in parrot. Okay, I want you to do the same thing. Find the rule, describe it in your own words, and cite it. Okay, step number 3, and this is the step that is informed by the information that we've covered in this unit, okay, this week. The most probable specific linguistic reason for the occurrence was the second language development of the child. This is not an error of transfer from the first language, because possession is formed differently in Spanish than it is in English, and therefore the child is not using information from Spanish to help them construct possession in English. Okay? In case you're not familiar with how possession is constructed in Spanish, and this is something that you would look up online, okay, inform yourselves of the construction in Spanish online, is in Spanish, in order to show possession, they use a prepositional phrase. So they would say el nombre de Maria, right? So of Maria, the name of Maria. And that's very different to English, because in English, as you know, we add that inflectional suffix to show possession. So this can't possibly be an L1 transfer error, because that information in Spanish would not have helped the child to sort of construct possession in English. Now we're going to go into the theory, right? We're going to list a theory to try and explain this second language development error. According to McLaughlin's attention processing model, the child may have made this error because she is not able to juggle all the necessary second language linguistic information, since she is still trying to learn the grammatical features and applications of rules. Because she is paying attention to different aspects of grammar while writing this excerpt, she may have neglected to add the bound inflectional suffix '(s) to the noun sister. And notice how I've cited it, so that information comes from this citation from that reference. Alternatively, she may be still learning these grammatical features in English and has not yet started to apply it to her writing. Okay. Now, let's go over an L1 transfer error. Okay, so we just covered an L2 development error. Now we're going to go over an L1 transfer error. The error that I've chosen is actually the last 3 words in this excerpt. We lives separate. It's not supposed to have the S on live. It's supposed to be we live separate. So here, the first thing we do is give a clear and complete description of the error. The child unnecessarily added the bound inflectional suffix s to the verb lives to modify for person in the phrase we lives separate to show possession. Oh, sorry, not to show possession. To show tense, person. So actually, let me correct that one moment because I don't want to confuse anyone. To show person. The idea, right, when we add an S is to show he or she, right, versus all of the other pronouns. But that is a clear and complete description of that error, that the child unnecessarily added that S for person when it was actually not needed for the pronoun we, okay, because it's supposed to be we live without the S separate. Okay, step number 2, you're going to give the standard US English language rule that is violated. The rule that was violated was that in English, when conjugating the present tense regular form of verbs for first person plural, which is we, okay, no suffixes are added to the verb. The only suffix that is added is the suffix s for third person singular, like he or she, to regular verbs in present tense. Okay, and that is a rule that is stated in your Parrot book, and I've cited Parrot there. Okay, step 3, you're going to choose right now. Well, you know that this is an L1 transfer example, but at this point in your essay, you would choose whether it's L1 transfer or L2 development as the reason for the error, and then you would go into those tables that I showed you before and choose a theory that makes the most sense to help you justify that error. Okay? So here I would write, the most probable specific linguistic reason for the occurrence was first language transfer from this child's first language of Spanish. In Spanish, present tense regular verbs that represent the first person plural form of we receive a bound inflectional suffix s to modify for person. This is the case when the regular present tense verb live, which in Spanish is vivir, and which when conjugated for first person plural receives the bound inflectional suffix es, which includes an S, as we see in the child's writing of we lives separate. The child made this error because they may have been transferring the grammatical knowledge from Spanish. Okay, so notice the argument that we're making. We're saying that in Spanish, it does get an ending. The ending is EIS, ace, which does include an S, which the child may be transferring, and that's probably potentially one reason why the child made this error. Also notice how I've referenced an article by Bialystok, 1991. You would do this, but you would be using 2 sources. Okay, so I'd want you to read through the articles and find two sources which will help you explain your discussion, your choice. Okay, hopefully that has helped you understand the components of that second essay and has given you a chance of really writing it up very effectively. I look forward to receiving and reading your assignments. And before we go today, I just want to cover the objectives again. Remember that today we learned how to distinguish between the tenets of the main second language acquisition theories, also identifying the relationship between ELL's first and second language. We went through the language acquisition process for monolingual, simultaneous, and sequential bilinguals. We also talked about which literacy concepts would be transferable across languages and which would have to be learned in each language separately. We went through different phenomena of bilingualism, and you also learned how to use these language acquisition theories that we've covered today in order to explain your linguistic errors for assignment B. Thanks, and see you next week.